So as you can see, today's presentation is being recorded, so you and others who were unable to make the live meeting will be able to view it later. I'm Bonnie Brown, the president of Humane Network, and I want to introduce my colleague, Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Blankenberg, and I am the CEO of Humane Network.
Well, we're pleased to be with you all here this afternoon, and today's meeting is actually about meetings, and we're going to talk about how to run effective meetings that will help you accomplish your goals and that other people won't mind attending. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to cover planning for a successful meeting, and we'll talk briefly about organizational structure and purpose for your meetings, and then we'll talk about some specific meeting types. Then we're going to run through 15 tips for running an effective meeting, and halfway through, my colleague Diane will be taking over the discussion, and then Diane will share with you some activities and processes for meeting facilitation that we think will be helpful for you, hopefully. If you have questions throughout the meeting, please feel free to chat in the chat session. And at the end, we do plan to have time to answer some of your questions, hopefully. So with that, we will get started off about meetings. And I would venture that it's a safe bet that all of you have had times in your lives when you wished that you had fewer work meetings. It's pretty much a common sentiment. And at the same time, I think we recognize that meetings are really important, or at least they can be. They can be a really important part of your organization's internal communications. So making sure that everyone in the organization is on the same page, that they know each other, that there's good internal sharing of information that everybody needs to know. And the second important purpose is that they help to develop relationships with other individuals and other agencies. So meetings can have a really valuable networking purpose, especially when they're well planned. And a really great meeting can get things done. So that's our goal in talking today, is to share some tips with you on how to accomplish or how to get the most out of your meetings. So next, we're going to talk a brief moment about the many different types of meetings and the reasons why you might have some of these meetings. Team huddles or stand-up meetings, they're really short and they can be quite frequent, and they can be really helpful for getting your whole team on the same page. But for other reasons, you may want to host a brainstorming meeting or an innovation meeting where you think about what could be done differently. Planning meetings, everything from strategic planning to more detailed planning meetings would fall into that category. Post-mortem or a retrospective meeting to take a look at how something went, maybe to assess how your event went and take down notes so that you can pull those out next year and be sure you don't make the same mistakes, and that you take advantage of opportunities that you came up with from this particular meeting. Then there are information sharing meetings. These are where someone is perhaps making a presentation or you're sharing specific data or information with team members. Decision-making meetings can be specifically to try to come to a conclusion about something. Problem-solving meetings, something came up, something's going wrong. Getting the right people in the room to address whatever the problem is that's occurring. Status update meetings. Now, sometimes these could be better handled in other ways, but there could be good reasons to get everyone together to discuss as well. Team building meetings where you work on your team interpersonal relationships and ability to work together and get things done. Networking meetings, which are about meeting others and building relationships. An onboarding meeting where you have new folks coming onto the agency. These could be volunteers or they could be staff members. And of course, training sessions and workshops, which are really important for a variety of reasons, but also for morale and helping people to build their skill sets so they're happier in their work. A performance meeting where you sit down and talk about how things are going between management and a staff member. An all hands or company meeting where you get everyone together so everyone's on the same page. And then, of course, there are governance meetings like board meetings. And the quality of these meetings can differ widely depending on the planning that you do. So we are going to talk a bit more about that in just a moment. But I thought it might be helpful if we looked at how creating a structure for your organization's meetings can be really helpful to you and your team. So here would be an example for maybe a mid-sized organization. Perhaps your meeting plans include a management meeting, and they are once a week, perhaps, maybe for 1 hour, and you really keep it to that amount of time, but it allows everyone on the management team to share information and get information together. A stand-up meeting, this could be for the entire staff of your shelter or rescue group, and maybe it happens twice weekly for just 15 minutes to be sure everyone has the latest information, knows about any changes, that kind of thing. An all-staff meeting, this might be the kind of thing that you do twice a year for an hour, where everyone comes together, talks about perhaps the organization's mission and goals, and the progress we're making toward those. Supervisory one-on-one meetings with direct reports are really helpful and important. And ideally, it would be good to do those routinely, perhaps once a month for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, so that you have time to communicate. And when you actually are doing performance reviews, nothing comes as a shock because you've already been having these meetings where you're touching base and having opportunities to improve or giving people kudos and encouragement, whatever's needed for each person. And then, of course, there are planning and budget meetings, and these would be annual at least. And there could be other special meetings as needed. But if you create a plan like this for your organization that encompasses the meetings that your organization needs, I think you'll find that it will be a lot more effective. And then you'll be able to ask yourself, too, do we really need a meeting for this? So we're going to go on to the next slide. One of the most important things about any meeting is determining the desired outcome. So why do you want to have this meeting? What will the outcome be from the meeting? And that will help guide you in terms of everything else. And it can also help you determine if, in fact, it should be a meeting or if there's a better way to accomplish this particular desired outcome. So once you have your desired outcome and we know what we want to accomplish and we've asked ourselves the question, is a meeting the best way to do this? Then you can start the actual planning for the meeting. And even a really concise meeting or a routine meeting, it's really worth having a clear plan. And so we'll talk that through. Who should attend? Determining who you need in the room in order to accomplish the desired results of the meeting. Then you're going to look at where should the meeting be held and when should it be held, a convenient time for most of the people who you need to have there, of course. And what type of meeting will this be? So an example might be a standing meeting where nobody even sits into a chair because you're going to convey some important information pretty quickly, and then people are going to get back to their work. And this could be a routine thing or a special thing. You could have a presentation, or it could be a brainstorming session. And so figuring out what type of meeting this is going to be is really helpful. And then, of course, your agenda is essential. And it could include, of course, more than one thing. You could have a brainstorming session on something within the meeting and a discussion or a presentation as part of the meeting. But the main thing is to have a really clear agenda prior to the meeting that goes over what do you need to cover in this meeting and how much time is going to be allotted to each item. And as we go through other things, we'll talk about give you some tools and talk about how you can keep things on track, because being the chairperson of a meeting can be challenging, and there are some strategies you can use to keep things on time and to sort of do a time check and make sure everyone's on the same page and that your meetings aren't perpetually running long. So then, as I mentioned, you're going to want to consider what process is best for each agenda item. So as we said, this could be brainstorming, it could be discussion, it could be a presentation, and we will go through some other tools that you can use for getting to where you need to in your meeting that you can use as you plan your agenda. And then, of course, what specific roles are needed for this meeting? Depending on the type of meeting, you probably or almost certainly need a chairperson or someone who's keeping track of the agenda, keeping things online. You might need a scribe or a secretary, someone who's going to take careful notes throughout the meeting so you can review these at the conclusion of the meeting. You might need a facilitator, especially if this is a discussion where there could be very different viewpoints and you're trying to come to consensus or perhaps at least a better understanding of where the other parties are coming from. Sometimes a facilitator can help. So those are just some of the things you want to do while you're planning a meeting so that your meeting is successful. So now we're going to start off on the promised 15 tips for better meetings. The first one really is to have a strong meeting chairperson or facilitator. And this would be determined before the meeting. And this is the person responsible for keeping the meeting on track, on time. And also part of their job is making sure that everyone participates. You will have some people who are quiet and you want to be sure that they're invited to speak specifically because they could have some really vital information or a great idea, but they're just a little shy without some encouragement. And you can cultivate your skills so that you can become an effective meeting chair, and we'll share some more tips and tools on that as we go forward. There was some great advice from Gretchen Rubin, who is the woman who created and then wrote a book about the Happiness Project, and it's about ways to be happier. And her advice for meeting chairs is to be cheerfully, impersonally decisive. And I think that it's such a great tip because there's a tendency to get annoyed, of course, with our colleagues when they won't be quiet or when things aren't going right on schedule. And so to remain cheerful and to be decisive, I think are two really key points that that wonderful quote brings to mind for me. The next tip is about logistics. So you're going to want to plan the meeting for a location that is going to be comfortable for everyone, where there's enough space for people. And if it's an online meeting, of course, you want a good platform, but there are several of those out there. And I'm sure thanks to the pandemic, we're all painfully aware of all of them. If it's a meeting at which there will be people who do not already know each other, name tags are really a great idea. And then, of course, you want to think about refreshments. Should you have refreshments for the meeting, especially if the meeting is going to be a longer meeting, that can really help. So tip number 3 is never ask people to go to a meeting without sharing why they're supposed to be there. And so that means that clear purpose that you developed when you were thinking about what is the desired outcome? That is something that you are going to share with everyone. And it might seem obvious, but really it is not always done. People often get asked to just be at a meeting. Now, of course, if this is your standing managers meeting, there probably isn't a need to keep explaining why we have this meeting. But when new people are invited to the meeting, it would be good to explain the purpose of the meeting so everyone understands why they're being asked to be there. The fourth tip is to create an agenda and to stick to it. And, creating an agenda in and of itself takes a little time, but it doesn't have to take much time. And you can solicit from the other attendees what they want to see on the agenda. So if you are the chairperson of a board of directors, you can get in advance what people want to have on the agenda. And then you can determine what to put on the agenda, which things make the most sense to actually cover in the board meeting. So again, circulating that agenda in advance. You want to be sure to share information with people that you expect them to read in advance in preparation for the meeting. And you want to make that really clear that the assumption of the meeting is that you're going to already be familiar with this document that's attached. And you want to be sure you're giving them enough time to do that. On your agenda, you want to allot specific time for each topic. So you'd have a start time for the discussion on the topic and the end time for the topic. And if it's beginning to run long, you can do a time check with people about that and say, this topic, we need to wrap the discussion up. You can discuss the possibility of having a subcommittee really delve into it and then come back to the board. You can also put it onto a future agenda. And if there are things being brought up that really don't fit into the agenda, as people tend to want to do, you can use a parking lot for that. So all that is a piece of paper, preferably either on a whiteboard where you can take a picture, or a big chart where you can write down parking lot, and you can capture topics that come up that are off subject for the particular agenda for today, and then come back to them in the future. And people at least feel heard. You heard that they wanted to talk about a specific thing, but we're not going to let it derail the whole entire meeting while we now start off on a 20-minute discussion of something that isn't one of the agreed upon topics for today's meeting. So, and of course, you will want to think about, if it's a long meeting, like half-day meeting, you want to be sure there are breaks and that people can have time to check their email and text so that they don't feel compelled to do so in the middle of your meeting. Tip number 5, start and end on time. And this is really important because if you start late, people begin to wonder why they bothered to show up on time. And before you know it, everyone is showing up late. So it's really important to start meetings on time, to set that as the norm and the standard for your organization. And if people are late, someone can fill them in later, and you can mention to them it would be really helpful if they showed up on time. Now, in animal shelters, stuff happens. So there will be times when someone will be late, and it's better not to hold up the meeting for everyone else, even though it certainly could be a totally legitimate reason that's holding someone up. So if meetings have to run long, it's really helpful to talk with people about it and not just assume that they can continue to stay in the meeting, in this endless meeting that could be running way past the planned meeting time. So instead, you can say to people, we're not through the agenda items. Can everyone stay an extra 15 minutes to wrap up? And then see what the response is. Can people stay another 15 minutes? And that is really showing a lot of respect for their time and making sure that people remain focused and aren't distracted by what they think they need to do next. So remember, start and end on time. It's an important discipline, and it would be better to have another meeting than to just keep having a run-on meeting. So the next point is to keep standing meetings as short as possible. So even your routine meetings should be very structured. So although you can have an agenda that may be like a standing agenda for the manager's meeting, where you go through a specific series of steps for each meeting. And you should consider having rules for canceling the meeting. For example, with a board, you would have a quorum, and unless the quorum is present, you really can't conduct business. So that would be a reason for a board meeting. But there may also be reasons for canceling other standing meetings. Say when a certain percentage of all your managers are off that week or out sick, maybe it's just as well not to have the meeting that week. The next important point might run a little counter to some of these things about time management, but it really is important that people get to know each other and that they build relationships together. So it's good to build time into meetings, at least occasionally, that include opportunities for people to chat. And it really helps people, once they have developed a relationship on a personal level, to feel more connected and engaged with the work of the organization. So networking time, time for chit-chat, that can have value too. The thing is, it should be planned time in your meeting and not taking away from the actual meeting agenda. So the last one I'm going to cover before I hand this over to Diane is that it's really important to start meetings with a positive tone and to promote interaction of your team members. So how you will do that will, of course, vary a lot by the very nature of the meeting, but you can think about ways to promote positive feelings in the meeting. And part of it is the energy of the person leading the meeting, the chairperson, if they can be, as Gretchen said, optimistic and positive, that will keep a set a nice tone from the outset of the meeting rather than sounding grumpy, tired, and eager to get out of the room. So there is that element of the chairperson helping to set the tone. But another thing you can do that we have done in the past, Diane and I, with a great success, is to start off routine meetings with one good thing. And what that meant for us was going around the room and having each person or team representative briefly share something really good that happened in their department that previous week leading up to the meeting. And the good thing about this is that humans, especially all of us in our field, have plenty of things to feel worried about, and there are lots of stressors. So for a moment, it takes us out of thinking about all the many problems we have and puts us into the mindset of having to come up with something good that happened that week. And it really does help alter our mindsets as we go into the meeting. Also, it helps everyone in the meeting to learn about the work of the other people in the meeting. And that's really important because their colleagues, the other managers, all have important jobs, but very different. Their concerns and what constitutes a good thing for them could be radically different. So it's helpful for everyone to hear what the other departments are contributing to the overall success of the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Diane.
Hi there. Thank you, Bonnie. So we're going to continue with the rest of the 15 tips for better meetings. And number 9 is to maintain focus. Bonnie covered this a little bit in some of the others as far as, following the agenda and sticking to it. I think one of the things that's helpful here, once again, is who is facilitating or leading the meeting and having the right skill set to be able to respectfully keep people on track. Because sometimes I've been in some meetings where if the time was up, it was just this abrupt done, on to the next, and the person didn't even get to finish their thought. So there is a skill to being able to facilitate so people do feel comfortable and heard, and then to redirect when appropriate. And as she mentioned, the concept of the parking lot is very important, because then it's not like you're just dismissing them altogether, but they're actually going to have that comment or idea or question addressed later. And I think that's a really critical piece of it, because I've also seen parking lot lists created and then nothing ever happens with them. So you just need to be sure you really do go back and do something with that parking lot, and whether it's putting it onto the next agenda, or maybe it's addressing something one-on-one, or even in a subcommittee, as Bonnie also mentioned. The other really important part of being able to maintain focus is to possibly set up some ground rules ahead of time for whatever meeting it is. You can do this on an ongoing basis if it is a routine recurring meeting, or you can do it real time if this is not a regular meeting. But it's just being clear on how we're going to communicate during the meeting, and how we are hopefully going to agree to not be using our electronic devices, as Bonnie also mentioned, especially if you build in time for that. Just how we're going to engage individuals. And the thing that is so important about processes in agendas is because not everybody has the same outgoing personality and is willing to speak up. So there are people that are more quiet that may not say anything. So if you can build that in either through the real-time facilitation or through a specific process that allows everybody to contribute more evenly. And also there are the people that are very anxious to contribute, and they may dominate the conversation. So you just want to be sure that there's an opportunity to be balanced there, and having some ground rules up front can help with that. Tip number 10 is to draw out people who are not speaking up. And this is what I was referring to as far as having the skills to facilitate and to do it respectfully. Trying not to put people on the spot, but that's sometimes difficult. But again, I think that's why processes are good, because it's kind of it's a known thing up front, and it's not just about one individual or trying to point out one individual who is not contributing. But you can, and certainly ask direct questions. And I personally have done that. I've facilitated a lot of meetings where I realize 2 or 3 people are doing all the talking, and you might turn to Bonnie and say, well, what do you think about this particular topic? Or what is your response to a previous point? Just want to be sure you're setting the tone that is encouraging and allowing for different opinions and different people to be able to speak up and to be able to disagree, respectfully disagree, so that you're really going to maximize the outcome of your meeting if you're getting all the ideas contributed as needed. So tip 11 is share the credit for successes. And certainly it's a great place to honor others and their contributions, whether it's individual ideas that have coming up during the meeting, or it's successes that they've had elsewhere and outside the meeting. This is also an opportunity. I think when people are doing the one good thing that's happened during the week, it's an opportunity even for the participants to give kudos to their fellow teammates too, and give them credit for accomplishments. I think sometimes it's depending on personalities, it's for some more difficult to give credit to others, and it really it really is a positive for you too. And I don't think it's always viewed that way, but you're not only making the team feel better overall and the individuals that had those accomplishments, but it really sets the tone for a shared community and a shared, I guess, attempt to accomplish whatever your mission is. So think about that and be aware of whether that's something that comes natural for you or not. And if it's not, maybe you build it in as a specific item in your agenda. And again, applauding and praising people is helpful. Not everybody likes to get praised the same way. So it's kind of being cognizant of how your team likes to get that. And some can be embarrassed by applause, but for the most part, people like to be recognized. Tip number 12 is avoid remarks that may undermine or antagonize others. So again, it's about being respectful, and who's ever leading the session is obviously going to be modeling this, hopefully, and being able to disagree, as the bullet says here, without being disagreeable. I know that's challenging, and there are some people that kind of have in fact, I was talking to somebody recently, a client that was talking about another person on their team that disagrees with everything. So everything they say, there's always the negative or what's wrong with it. And you want people to feel comfortable disagreeing, but there's kind of a responsibility on both sides here, to be respectful and listen to it, but also to for the person that's listening to be open to ideas too, and not immediately disagree with everything, but being able to give it some thought and disagree also in a respectful way. So tip number 13 is utilize a process for decision making. This is something I think I started to say a lot, but I think it's most people or groups don't really give a lot of thought to ahead of time. And I think it's important to think about, just like you want to think about your desired outcome ahead of time, you want to think about the process for making whatever decisions, if you have decisions to be made in the meeting, and what the process is going to be and what kind of decision is that. There are different kinds of decisions, and as a leader or manager of any of a group or a department or a team that's just working on a specific project, sometimes you make command decisions, which means it's going to be, you're going to decide that's what it is. You don't really have time or need to get the input, and maybe you just need to communicate it. Other times it may be a collaborative decision where you want to get input, and you're going to make a decision and hopefully come to some kind of consensus. Another type of collaborative decision, though, is where you get input, but you're still going to make the final decision. And I think it's really important to be clear about this up front, because there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than asking people for their opinion on something and them thinking they're going to be part of making the decision, and then they're not. So it's almost worse than not asking. So be clear on that. And then Actual making decisions, I'm sure everybody's heard of Robert's rules, been around forever. It's used a lot in government meetings and organizations. And the decision-making part of it is basically usually decided by majority vote. Martha's rules is another set of rules, and we'd be happy to share that with you. It tends to be focused more on collaboration and a more collaborative style of meeting. And one of the process for that that's used in Martha's rules to make a decision is what's described here at the bottom of this particular slide. And you can use it for a lot of different things. One, like I said, is to determine or to make a decision. Another is just to take a poll and decide where does the team stand on a particular issue at this time. So you might be having a discussion and you realize you've been having the discussion for a while and you're getting a sense maybe that everybody's on the same page, or you're just not sure. And so you take a poll, and the poll is that thumbs up means that it's my first choice. If I was, the king or queen of whatever this was, that's what you would decide. And you're going to support it 100%. A thumb to the side means that it may not be my first choice, but I still can and will 100% support it. And the third choice is a down thumb, which means I can't support it at this time. It doesn't mean I won't eventually. It might mean that I have some additional information that you don't have, or the rest of the team doesn't have. Might mean that I have some questions that I need answers for. I just don't understand something. And that just, and when you do a thumbs down, it means you're agreeing to conversation about it. The other two, up and sideways, means we don't need to discuss. So it's a great way to take a poll and really decide or determine how much more discussion needs to happen. So if you're trying to come to a consensus decision, it means you want everybody to be at the thumbs up or thumbs sideways. So once you have a discussion, you can do another poll and see where you're at and work through the issue. Tip number 14 is be specific about action items. As Bonnie knows, this is kind of one of my things, and I'm always taking notes on action items. But it's really important to have due dates. That isn't always that easy, and more important, I would say, is even who's responsible for the particular action. But you can document them in the meeting. I always like to review them at the end of the meeting because not everybody hears the same thing. And if I'm the one documenting, I may not even gotten it right. But we want to make sure everybody else understands what those actions are, especially if it's theirs. And then to be able to send an email to follow up on it so everybody has it in writing what they are. Then sometimes with some, especially ongoing meetings and ongoing teams, you can have a separate action item list that tracks what those are, when they're due, and follows up when they've been completed. And then the last tip, number 15, is to keep improving meetings. One of the things I started doing ages ago, way before I even got into animal welfare, was to do a debrief at the end of most meetings. And it's something you can do very quickly. Just a T-chart of saying, what went well in this meeting and what would you want to continue to, so that you know that you're going to have effective meetings in the future. And the other is opportunities for improvement. So what maybe didn't go as well, and what can you do to make the meeting more effective the next time? One of the things I used to do at times with the list of opportunities for improvement, especially if it was an ongoing meeting, is to pick one of those and circle it and say, okay, this is what we're going to work on next time. And sometimes these are as trivial, or what might seem as trivial, as the temperature of the room, but that can have a huge impact on whether people are participating and engaged or not, whether they're too cold or too hot. And that's an easy one to fix. Or it could be as, more difficult as far as maybe the dynamics of the personalities that are involved. But when you are facilitating the meeting and doing this debrief, it's really important not to get defensive and start countering what people are saying. It's just their opinion. Kind of use the brainstorming rules. where all good thoughts are good. I mean, all thoughts are good thoughts. So just be sure that you are at least addressing some at some ongoing basis, or there's kind of really no point in having the debrief. Then the other thing is you can always do some kind of periodic survey, and I suggested here maybe annual, just to, if this is an ongoing type of meeting, just to get everybody's input on how things have been going over the previous time period and what could be done better in the future. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about some specifics, and most of these have been mentioned before, but want to get into it in a little bit more detail. I know that both Bonnie and I talked about, you know, you're setting the tone and wanting to have a positive start to meetings. So an icebreaker, or sometimes they're called warm-ups, can be built into the agenda in the beginning. And again, it's going to depend on how well the team knows each other, whether that's an ongoing meeting or not. But it can be super fast. Some take longer, and it depends on kind of what you're trying to accomplish. There's listed here some of the reasons for doing icebreakers. You know, just like the terms sounds, icebreakers, just kind of to open things up and get people engaged and willing to communicate and participate. And it kind of sometimes helps to take their mind off of whatever else was going on, whether it was in their personal life, or, as we all know, those of us that do or have worked in shelters, it's always crazy. So there's always a lot to be thinking about, and sometimes it's hard to shift gears. So it can help with that. And especially if people don't know each other, there's a lot of types of warm-ups or icebreakers that do help each other get to know each other a little bit better on a personal level. And it kind of helps with that concept of needing that chit chat time that we talked about earlier. It may not be as free form, but a way to talk about things that aren't specifically as directly related to the operations or the organization. And again, I already said that it can be done very quickly. It depends how many people are in your team and how and what type of icebreaker you want to use. And this 2 truths and 1 lie is used a lot. And so you probably, there's a good chance some of you have done this before. It's a great one if you haven't, especially with a new team. And it's just a simple round robin where each person has come up with 3 facts about themselves, 2 truthful and 1 not. And they share those facts around the room, and you vote to see which ones are the truthful and which one is not. I know it can sound, some of these I know are, I think some people have a kind of cringe when you talk about warm-ups and icebreakers, because it can be viewed sometimes as a waste of time, but not really understanding that getting to know each other and feeling comfortable with me is really going to help the rest of the meeting go much better. Another thing that I like to do, and Bonnie, I have used in a lot of meetings, is just keep this series of questions. And I have tons that I'd be happy to share with you all. And again, it's just a round robin with whatever the question is. There are some examples listed here to again, try to share something personal about each individual, get to know them a little bit better, and make it a little more comfortable when you're talking about some of the harder topics. We've both talked about brainstorming, and I'm sure everybody's been in many, many brainstorming sessions, but I still see a lot of brainstorming where people tend to jump on to an idea and either provide judgment or want to provide a counterpoint or have a long discussion about it. If you're facilitating it, and just keep the ideas coming, because it's sometimes even the crazy ideas that generate even the ones that you end up with that aren't as crazy, and what might seem crazy might not be so crazy in the end. So you just want to keep them coming quickly with no judgment and get them all documented. Then you can evaluate them after the fact. One way to organize brainstorming ideas is to have each person put it, or each participant put one idea on a sticky note, and then you can post them on a wall or a board and organize them in order to categorize and group them in things where that they have in common that can help narrow down some of the ideas and then ultimately be able to prioritize them. And there's a lot of other tools to help with making decisions and prioritizing. But the most important part is to just initially get all the ideas out there without judgment and without a lot of discussion. And I mentioned the prioritizing and decision making, and again, we talked a little bit about different ways to make decisions. One way to prioritize is to list the pros and cons of the different ideas once you've kind of narrowed them down and categorized them, and then basically look at what the ones where the pros outweighs the cons, or the pros outweigh the others pros in other possible decisions. Weighted voting is something I like to use, and again, it's a way. It doesn't have to eliminate ideas, but it is a way to prioritize, and that's where, depending on how many ideas you have, you can ask each person to rate their top 2 or their top 3 choices that are being presented, and then their top choice gets the most votes. The next choice gets the next amount or less amount, and the next one gets even less, so that you end up with a weighted voting of their ranking. You add all those up and it allows you to prioritize. If you need more information on that, I can certainly share that with you offline. But a lot of times when you do this, you'll see that a lot of ideas will just fall out. They're not even in the top 3. And it doesn't mean you might not want to do everything eventually, but you can at least know what's most important to most people and be able to start there. We already talked about the Martha's polling, which still is something that I find very useful. So in wrapping up here, I'm just going to read this quote because I really like it. It says, "Meetings get a bad rap, and deservedly so. Most are disorganized and distracted, but they can be a critical tool for getting your team on the same page." I believe that meetings are part of our work. So if we don't like them or we don't want to go to them, then there's something wrong with the meeting. Either the meeting didn't need to happen because there was another way to communicate the information, if it's just a one-way communication, or they aren't well planned for, or they aren't well facilitated. So meetings, in my opinion, are part of what we do, so we should look forward to going to them and want to be a part of it. So we hope we've given you some tips and ideas that will help you make meetings like that, and that your team will want to come to them and they will want to participate in them. So I want to open it up to any questions. You can unmute yourself if you're muted and ask it out loud. You can put a question in to chat. You can raise your little mechanical Zoom hand if you want to get attention. And if there's any other questions in chat, maybe Lori could read the question for us. So any questions? I don't see.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
While we're waiting for questions, and hopefully a few of you have some, there were just 2 things that I wanted to add. One other benefit that I find to icebreakers is that once people, and there's actually a book called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, and he's a doctor, a medical doctor, a surgeon, but he has examined processes that get people engaged. And one thing that one of their studies showed is that as they implement these processes in order to reduce errors in the operating room, one of the things they discovered that worked best was to have everyone introduce themselves in the operating room. And that's like part of this checklist that's used by hospitals and healthcare facilities that implement the recommended their recommendations for reducing surgical mistakes and other hospital mistakes as well. And what the study showed is that once someone speaks, So once someone in the operating room says, "Hi, I'm, Jody, the prep nurse," or whatever their role is, just the act of having said your name and opened your mouth and given voice would give people the confidence to say things, because what they used to find is that everyone would defer to the surgeon. So maybe one nurse notices that a sponge has been left in the incision, but is nervous to say anything because, after all, this is the world's top heart surgeon or something here. So that once people spoke in the operating room, they had more self-confidence to speak up when they saw something going wrong. And it's really interesting because you can imagine the sort of hierarchical pressures in an operating room and how crucial it is that everyone feel comfortable to speak, right? So to me, someone who, naturally, like, just left to my own devices, would I come up with the idea of icebreakers? No, I probably wouldn't, because I would speak up in the meeting if I wanted to say something. And, so to me, like, I wouldn't naturally think of it. But having seen it in operation and having read about the benefits of getting everyone in the room to speak, I wholeheartedly feel like they are totally worth the time, because once everyone said something, then they're much more comfortable saying something else in the meeting. So I don't know if we have any questions, but I have another comment if we do not. So,
There aren't any
have
in chat.
questions?
So, well, wait a minute, there comes another one. Let me see. Oh, here's one. The question is, how do you get people to talk? At our board meetings, we have people who say nothing at all, but after the meeting, they send an email with how they feel about a certain topic that was discussed at the meeting. The problem is I need the whole team to hear what this person's opinion was, especially if we're making a big decision. Do you want to answer it first, Bonnie, or do you want me to go for it?
You go ahead first, and then I'll chime in after.
I think this is where having a process built in to whatever that topic was is really helpful. A process that involves everybody and requires them to participate. So that is what I would suggest. But when it may come up after the fact and you haven't really prepared ahead to have that process, I think you can say to the person when they respond to you is that I'd like to put that on the agenda for the next time. Or if it's a big enough topic, you can call a special meeting. And you can even ask them if they're okay with you sharing the point. It kind of depends on what the topic is. And I think the person and the relationships, because there can be a lot of baggage behind the scenes with different personalities. But first, I would have a process in place in the beginning that encourages and sometimes requires participation by others. Second, I would try to see if you can put it into a next meeting. And third, try to figure out how to deal with sharing their information with the team yourself. So, Bonnie, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything Diane said. I guess I would say, even if you lack a specific process that requires everyone to contribute, if you know there are people who tend to be shy, asking their opinion in the meeting, where you are, in a sense, putting them on the spot to share. But on the other hand, that's part of what being on the board is about. It's being willing to contribute, and failing that, if they really can't do it, then I think asking them if you can share this with everyone else, be it via email or however, is really important, because again, that's what being on a board is about sharing. And I think that if you do have a dominant board member, someone who shuts others down, who acts scornfully when someone expresses an opinion, like if someone disagrees with them, they become very disagreeable, and then it really tamps down people's willingness to put their neck out, right, and say something that might run counter to whatever this dominant person thinks or wants. So, to me, one way to handle that would be to sit down the dominant person and say, we realize this is not what you intend, but this is how this is coming across, and it is creating a problem. That's an unpleasant conversation, but the potential returns are that the problem goes away, and it's just a terrible problem, right? So addressing that, or finding someone on the team who's willing to address it, or finding a facilitator to facilitate a meeting where that information comes out, or doing a survey where people are anonymously able to voice their opinions, and then that information can be shared with the individual. Yes, it's painful for that individual to hear that, but at the same token, the individual is causing some degree of discomfort for everybody else. So those are the kinds of conversations that are high stakes, but they also have high potential payoff, right? Because if you resolve the situation, you are in a just much, much better place. So anyway, those would be my thoughts about it. And also the process Diane suggested, where people write down thoughts on a sticky note and put them up. I mean, that also frees up very shy people to express their opinions in ways that definitely get heard. And it's kind of the great equalizer, right? Because the thoughts are being put down on notepads, and it's not said with great passion or anger or anything in the meeting. It's just a thought on a piece of paper. So I do think there's strategies that you can use. There is another question, but I do want to come back to decision making, because I think that's at the heart of some of the problems that boards of directors have. So I think there's another question though. Diane, did you want to say anything more after what I said?
No, I was just going to read the next question, but do you want to have your thought first, or?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the next question is, do either of you have tips for online meetings in particular? I'll give my thoughts and then let Bonnie add, but I actually think, because I've done a lot of online meetings, even before COVID, we were doing a lot, and then during and since even more. I really think that everything that we talked about applies to online meetings as well as in-person meetings. How you do some of those things are different, but I think you go through all the same steps. And I think the one thing that is different is to take advantage of the built-in tools. Zoom and all the platforms have built-in tools, so you can do almost anything you can do in a room together in a Zoom or one of the other platforms that many people use. So just be really, really conscious of the tools that are available and use those effectively. And you can do breakout sessions. They have whiteboards, they have voting. As I mentioned earlier, you can put your hand up when people want to talk. You can display people's videos differently. So just take advantage of the technical aspects of whatever tool you're using.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Diane's comments. I think the other thing is sometimes with online meetings, because we're not all dressed up in our work attire and entering a room, we tend to forget that it's still a meeting. And so having an agenda, a really clear purpose, a chairperson for the meeting who's calling on those who don't speak out, and perhaps trying to control the amount of time that the meeting is running on. All of those kinds of meeting essentials or basics can apply to an online meeting. If you have not been running the meetings that way, though, then it requires, sort of changing the meeting and refocusing the meeting. And you could just do that if you are the chairperson, or you could perhaps initiate a survey of people to see how they feel the online meetings are going. And then my guess is if you find the online meetings less than as productive as you wish they were, probably other people do too. So you might get some good feedback from a survey. And SurveyMonkey at its most basic level is free, and you could do a survey about the meetings that way that would draw out specific answers, especially if you have in your head some particular concerns, Avery, about the meeting or what might make it better. The survey can help draw that out from others on your team. So I don't see others, but there is one thing that I would like to, might be missing one. Well, Diane will look.
No, there's no other questions.
Any. So the one thing that I want to say is that I always sense that there's a lot of confusion around decision making and the role of the board of directors. And really, this could apply to anything, even if you're not on a board and you're just talking about decision making within your organization. There is someone who is going to be the decision maker ultimately. And consensus is fantastic when it can happen, when you can create consensus. That's great. And it is worth developing, right? Because it means sharing and getting to the same place where everyone has a shared understanding, and it's wonderful when they all feel the same way. And it's certainly important to understand where a dissenter is coming from. But when you're talking about a board of directors, the way a board is intended to function is not that unless we can get 100% consensus around each and everything, nothing happens. That's not a very effective way to run an organization. And ultimately, the board's votes in a majority rules. Now, some matters might require a supermajority, and that would be stated in your bylaws, like a 2/3 vote is required for maybe to change the bylaws or other specific questions. But otherwise, a simple majority would carry a decision like, should we invest in hiring a development director? And to allow like one person on the board to halt all progress isn't a sensible way to run an organization. Of course, to avoid hurt feelings, this has to be a shared understanding from the get-go about how your organization runs. And you could certainly change that understanding, right, through perhaps a presentation with an outside expert and then a discussion, or just bringing up a discussion by sharing information like articles with your board members in order to get a clear understanding. So consensus is great, but it shouldn't be a barrier to progress, in that every one of us has to feel exactly the same way about everything before we can move forward. And that's another reason why I actually like Martha's polling. You know, in that you could say, well, it isn't my first choice, but I can support this. And that to me is an important way to help create progress. But also for someone who's taking responsibility, be it the executive director, when you're talking about a staff meeting and you're getting a lot of input, ultimately the organization needs to come first and it needs to move forward. And so somebody has to make a decision. And like Diane said, making it clear to people that you are gathering their input so you can make a decision, rather than leading people to believe that, you know, this is a 100% consensus decision. Different things are going to require a different degree of discussion and a different degree of importance. And, you know, getting consensus on perhaps an adoption policy, like we are filled with animals and are we going to do fee-waived adoptions in 2 weeks, or we have one person who disagrees with that, so therefore we won't do it? Or is it a question about, you know, should we get a Coke machine in the break room? I mean, these things are very different in terms of the end results. And so I think deciding how you're going to make a decision can depend a lot on the urgency and the, you know, your mission, and how does it fit with that, and how crucial is it to the achievement of your organization's goals. So I'm sure Diane will be able to clarify some of what I tried to say. So Diane.
No, I think that's, yeah, it's just the point is to be clear on what kind of decision is needed that is warranted by the importance of the decision being made, and who needs to be involved in it, and being clear on that up front, I think is what's important. So you're not, like Bonnie said, setting people up just to let them down. So I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the last slide. Just has our contact information, and just want to encourage you all to reach out to us. The info email actually comes to me personally, and if you have something for Bonnie, I can forward to her. This phone number is my cell number, and we're just happy. I know we know a lot of you already, which is great, but we're always happy to provide additional information, or to talk through a particular situation that you might have in your organization. So we hope that this was helpful. We will be providing a follow-up email that has a PDF of the presentation as well as the recording link. Like I said, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or just want to chat about any of the topics that we discussed today.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And it was a pleasure being with you all, even if it was remotely here, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care and have a good evening.
Bye-bye.